We are here today because the Reynolds administration will not let us audit the controls on over $100 million in tax dollars spent on vouchers. This morning, we released a required report on the state's internal controls. It is a test of the state's processes and procedures that reviews the state's financial integrity for controls to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. It's called a SAS 122 letter. It's required to be released 60 days after the ACFR. Today is that day. There are 14 findings in the report, 6 of which are considered material weaknesses. Material weaknesses are a big deal. That means that we can't say that the state has sufficient controls to detect financial reporting errors or waste, fraud, and abuse. 3 of these material weaknesses are related to the state's voucher program. Despite multiple requests, the Departments of Education and Revenue did not provide documentation that students receiving the vouchers met eligibility income requirements according to the law. They also did not provide documentation of proof of controls ensuring that this $100 million was spent was adequately checked for waste, fraud, and abuse. And the Department of Education, in the third instance, refused to provide a report from Odyssey, that's the company that administers the program, called a SOC 2 report. That's about Odyssey's own protection of Iowans' personal data, confidentiality, and privacy. The other 3 material weaknesses are all related to unemployment benefits. They're all known, they are all defined. So those are in the report as well if you want to review those. The statutory requirement and the mission of this office is to shine a light on how the state spends your money, hold government agencies and lawmakers accountable, and help prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. We can't do that when the governor gives her approval to hiding documents and thumbing their nose at transparency for Iowans. It's our job to find out what's going on so that that information can be shared with Iowans after having been reviewed by an independent auditor. The bottom line is this. This administration won't let us audit the controls on $100 million in your tax money going out on vouchers program. That program is likely to grow to over $300 million next year. And we cannot say that it has appropriate and reasonable controls for waste, fraud, and abuse. They've also refused to provide proof that the personal data of Iowans is protected in the hands of its contractor. They are demanding, in essence, that you shorten Ronald Reagan's trust but verify to trust. No questions asked. With that, I'll take your questions.
Part of the response is that this
Sure. The Iowa Supreme Court has said twice that we don't necessarily need an engagement letter at all. However, we do have one for the ACFR. Our response in the report from our staff on that is the following sentence. Collectively, the team members involved in this engagement and this finding have over 100 years of experience. And I'll also add the quote that we have here from 2 of the leaders in our office, Brian Bruskern and Pam Borman. They are both CPAs. I am the 4th state auditor that they have served underneath. As CPAs who have served under 4 state auditors, we can say that this report comes from the same mission of nonpartisan accountability as our work has for decades. As a new material state program, auditing standards require us to consider this program related to the ACFR. When the administration says you need to have a separate engagement letter, that is Pam and Brian and our entire professional staff saying, this is related to the ACFR. We are CPAs, we are auditors, this is our job. I want to add, not only is it unanimous that the administration is wrong, personally I would say that that argument is intentionally wrong because they need to be able to say something to hide this information. Our professional staff has repeatedly met with the administration, and from what I hear of those meetings, it makes me think of that saying, it's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate the reminder. Would there be a downside? Yes, it's not following audit standards, which we are required to do and which our professional staff is required to do. Which I will add to that point. This is exactly what was predicted in coming out of SF 478, right? That documentation would be hidden. To that point, asking us for something that's inconsistent with standards, asking us to ignore something in the ACFR when it is supposed to be reviewed in the ACFR. That's what former US Comptroller General David Walker warned about. He said that the legislation, SF 478, is inconsistent with generally accepted government auditing standards, right? Go ahead, you think you had a question?
Yeah, I had a follow-up, Kevin. You were saying that it's in compliance with practice. I don't think I understand as a non-CPA.
Sure.
What's covered under an annual audit and
Sure.
Why does this distinction matter?
I think the easiest way to understand that is that we have people in this office who have been working and doing this job for decades. They have done this for 4 state auditors. They know how to do their job. They have ethical obligations that they have to maintain in order to keep their CPA license. And when someone tells them, you can't do this under the ACFR, their answer to that question is not only can we, but we have to. Let me repeat that one without the stumble. When they're asked or told by someone who hasn't done the work that they have done for decades, you can't do this under the ACFR, their answer to that question is, not only can we, but we have to. This is our obligation to review this information.
One of the other responses, SA program, social media posts, public statements.
Sure.
Saying that you disagree with the program, and then they bring in partiality.
I can. Again, first, I think the easiest response to that is, again, the statement from our staff, right? Our staff signs off on the reports that they issue. Their names are always at the back. And again, in our conclusion on these findings, they said, collectively, the team members involved in this engagement in this finding have in excess of 100 years of experience, specifically dedicated to audits of governmental entities, and are independent in fact and appearance. And again, Pam and Brian, who have been in this office for decades, who are both CPAs, they are saying, as CPAs who have served under 4 state auditors, we can say this report comes from the same mission of nonpartisan accountability as our work has for decades. As a new material state program, auditing standards require us to consider this program related to the ACFR. That is our staff, so many of whom are sick of being disrespected, who are tired of being told how to do their own jobs, saying this is us doing our job. Now, I don't think that their concern honestly is bias. I don't think that their concern honestly is bias. I think that their concern is that I'm honest. I spent 7 years prosecuting public corruption, the Iowa Film Office tax credit scandal, uncovering the largest lottery rigging scheme in American history. These were not smash and grabs. These were complicated situations where people took advantage of systems when those systems had wide open lanes for waste, fraud, and abuse. I am looking at the law that this legislature passed and this governor signed and repeatedly saying that this law, the law, is wide open for waste, fraud, and abuse, and anybody who cares about how tax dollars get spent should be talking about that from this role. There are no audits of how private schools spend the money in this program. There are no rules save one. They can do literally anything they want with tax dollars under this program as long as it's not a rebate. That should be alarming to anybody who cares about how tax money is spent. And I'm not going to be quiet about those wide open lanes for waste, fraud, and abuse.
The law that passed, that changed what your office do. If that hadn't passed, I guess how would you do this?
That's a very good the question. The question was, we referenced the passage of SF 478 and that being signed into law by the governor. If that hadn't passed, what would be happening in this situation is effectively, I think, the question. Number one, I don't think that state agencies would feel like they have the green light to hide information from the auditor's office, because the standard in the past has been when the auditor asks for something, you give it to them, which is exactly what every Iowan expects when it comes to an audit. Number two, in the past, we would have the capacity to go to court and challenge the denial of information in front of a judge. Now we don't have that capacity. We have to go to arbitration on a board that has 2 people who work underneath the governor out of 3. Dog and pony show. No.
Like you mentioned that this report covers the first year of the program with no income. Going forward, there will be no income limit, so there wouldn't be a question of whether people qualify for it for their income. But what would be the reason that your office needs to be able to audit this?
Sure. The fact that we can't say that they were controlling for the income limits is only one of 3 main issues related to the program in this report. The other is whether or not that Odyssey, the company involved, has legitimate protections for the personal data and the confidentiality of Iowans who are involved in the program, right? So if you'll remember, the noises that got made when SF 478 was passed in order to justify a pro-corruption law were, oh, we have to protect people's privacy. And now they're refusing to turn over a report that would show whether or not Odyssey, their hand-picked contractor, is actually protecting people's privacy. So that's a problem. The second one, outside of the income eligibility requirements, is just the idea in general that we could see $104 million going out, and that's all they let us see. No evidence of controls, no information as to what they're doing to make sure that that $104 million was spent appropriately and had good protections against waste, fraud, and abuse. This program is going to grow to over $300 million as expected and projected in the next year. Yeah, so as I said, there's 14 findings in the report. 6 of those are material weaknesses. The others are fairly ordinary. It has to do with reconciliations and the unemployment. It has to do with the employer side payments to the unemployment fund. And those are material weaknesses that we know and have defined and that have answers to them that are reasonable answers, where in this report, as we prepare it, right, we give the administration an opportunity to address the issue that has arose in the text of the report itself. And so for every one of those findings, they had some combination of an explanation and an answer or a plan of action that led us to say that we accepted their response.
Is there another program or nature that you have been able, this office, through this traditional newly created program that your audit staff?
Sure. I guess I'd answer that question this way. This office has never been refused the ability to examine a program, right? And I go back to our professional staff, right? They're the ones whose license is on the line to do their job the right way. When they determine what they're reviewing, one of the things that they're looking for is materiality, right? So it's got to be material, meaning a big enough amount of money that you have to review it for the ACFR, right? And this is on that line of materiality. But then the other piece that the standards tell you that you want to look at is you want to look at new programs. Why? Because they're just getting set up. And as you're just getting set up, you're going to have kinks in the program. You're going to have pieces of it that you need to get ironed out, some wrinkles in there. And so you want to look more closely at new programs to make sure that as they are getting set up, that everything is functioning as it's supposed to. And so what I can say is that never in the past have we been denied the capacity to do this, right? Oftentimes in our reports, right, the way that auditing, typically speaking, works is you're going to look at all kinds of things, and you might state that you look at it when you list your procedures, but you don't really get into the issues if there weren't any. So you won't necessarily say, other than saying we reviewed this program and that program, what you found if you didn't find problems. So it's easier to say it in the opposite, if that makes sense.
Arizona, are you familiar with that situation? How does that?
I don't, I'm familiar with it. Really the only quote when they pulled out a series of my statements that wasn't directly on point regarding just the lack of oversight was one that had to do with a report on these programs nationally. I am familiar with the Arizona program and the fact that it had problems. Their program runs differently than Iowa's. I think they had, you know, I don't know well enough to get into it in detail, I guess I'd say.
Would you do something like that to get the information you want?
It's a conversation that we may have with the professional staff in the office, or that they may have amongst themselves. But again, this is for the state's annual comprehensive financial report. And when somebody tells our professional staff, you can't look at it as part of the ACFR, their answer to that is not only can we, but we have an obligation to do it. And so we have to put this finding in there if you're going to tell us that we can't look at it.
These are, as you said, real weaknesses. What does that mean? Financial credit or whatever. What's the impact of having these?
Repeat the question, thank you. Yeah, the question was, you said that these are known as material weaknesses. What is the impact to the state's credit rating, that sort of thing? I guess I would say this, a finding that's a material weakness, I would say, was sort of like the equivalent of a warning. It's not a qualification of the opinion. You're not modifying the opinion, but you're telling the state publicly and clearly, this is a problem. In these cases, we can't even say that you have controls in place because you won't let us audit the controls of the program. And that this is the kind of thing that, if unaddressed, could grow into a larger problem. Not just in that sort of a situation, but also just a problem in terms of waste, fraud, and abuse of tax dollars.
You kind of spoke to this already, but I just have for clarification. Would you say that this is something that is a normal procedure that your staff has done, information that they've asked for in the past? It looks like the state is saying that asking for this kind of documentation heard of when it comes to actions. Can you just clarify a little bit between the he said, she said of
Amanda's question was, you know, the state's claim is that this is unheard of. Can we clarify in the he said, she said? You know, I suppose if I wanted to be able to say that this is unheard of and have it not be an outright lie, I suppose in my head I could say because it's a new program. So it's unheard of because we haven't audited this program before because it's new, right? It's not unheard of. And again, to me, this is in no way a he said, she said, because literally there is unanimous agreement that the administration's stance on these issues is wrong. The Iowa Supreme Court has said in 2 opinions, the state doesn't necessarily need an engagement letter at all, right? But also, we have one. So there's those 2 issues. And then again, we have Brian Bruskern and Pam Borman, 2 professionals in our office who are willing to go out of their way to clarify, right? This isn't just me standing here. This is our office. As CPAs who have served under 4 state auditors, we can say that this report comes from the same mission of nonpartisan accountability as our work has for decades. As a new material state program, auditing standards require us to consider this program related to the ACFR. So they're telling you, they're people who've been working for the state for decades. They're really proud of the work that they do. And they're frustrated with this amount of obfuscation. And then again, collectively, the team members involved in this engagement and in this finding have in excess of 100 years of experience. Now, I wouldn't expect the administration to come right out and say, we want to hide this information because we just don't want anybody digging in, right? So they have to say something. And so saying it's unheard of, okay, you got to make up an excuse, right? And I want to be clear here. You know, when we were investigating the Iowa Film Office tax credit, sorry, that's a different one. When we were investigating the lottery rigging scheme, you know, we knew about the Iowa ticket, and we knew about Eddie Tipton and his identity and the fact that he was the guy that wrote the program that picks winning numbers, right? In order for us to expand that investigation, we needed cooperation from state lotteries all over the country. And Terry Rich can tell you about this himself. I think he wrote about it in his book. There were a lot of people running those state lotteries that didn't want any digging. Some people were adamant about the fact that the lottery industry shouldn't cooperate with this because it's going to be more work for them. Why do we want a black eye? Let's let sleeping dogs lie, right? At the end of the day, the job, whether you're in this administration or you're running a state lottery in some state, is to serve taxpayers, is to provide transparency for them. And if you're saying we don't want to dig because we don't know what you're going to find, then that's not you doing your job.
Can I follow up to that and tie it back to the question about other state programs? Examples of programs you have been able to audit and get this kind of information, or are you saying that ESAs are so new and unique that there's really no drawback on it?
I guess I'd say this, right? For the ACFR, we are required to audit material programs, right? Standards want you to audit newer programs in more depth, right? So again, this is just our staff saying we are doing our job. Whether or not there's an example out there like that, again, I can tell you this, if there was, they would have done their job the same way. But we can't point to an example where we have been denied records. Thanks, everybody.